The stagecoach lurched to a stop so violent that Eleanor's head cracked against the wooden frame. Pain bloomed bright behind her eyes, sharp and immediate, and for a second the world tilted sideways. Rain hammered the roof like fists. Thunder rolled across the prairie, low and mean. "End of the line." The driver's voice came muffled through the storm. Eleanor blinked, pressed her gloved hand to her temple and felt the damp fabric come away clean. No blood. Small mercy. "This can't be right," she said. "You said Ryder's place. This is close as I go." "Close?" "Storm's getting worse. Horses won't make it through the gulch in this mess." She leaned toward the window, wiping condensation from the glass with her sleeve. Outside, there was nothing. Just rain turning the world into gray sheets, wind bending the grass flat, darkness settling in like something alive. No town, no ranch, no lights anywhere. "How far?" 3 miles. Maybe 4. Hard to say in weather like this. Her stomach dropped. "You're leaving me here?" "Lady, I got a schedule. You paid for passage to the junction. This is the junction." His tone wasn't unkind, just matter of fact. Like abandoning a woman in the middle of a storm was the most reasonable thing in the world. Eleanor looked down at her hands. They were shaking. Not from cold, though the temperature had been dropping for the last hour, but from something deeper. Fear, maybe. Or the slow realization that the decision she'd made 3 months ago in a cramped boarding house in Philadelphia was about to become very, very real. She'd answered an advertisement, a rancher in Texas looking for a wife. The letter had been blunt. "I'm not a rich man. Life here is hard. I need someone strong. If you're looking for easy, don't write back." She had written back. Not because she wanted adventure, not because she was brave, because she had nowhere else to go. Her parents were dead. The school where she taught had closed. Her savings were nearly gone, and the boarding house landlady had started looking at her with that expression, pity mixed with impatience. She was 26 years old, unmarried, and running out of options. Caleb Ryder's letters had been honest, at least. He didn't make promises he couldn't keep, didn't dress up the frontier with romantic language. He told her about droughts and cattle prices and the loneliness that came with living miles from another soul. And at the end of each letter, he asked if she was sure. She had been sure, or thought she was. Now, staring out at the storm, she felt that certainty crack. "Miss?" The driver's voice pulled her back. "You getting out or not?" Eleanor swallowed hard, reached for her bag, a battered leather case containing everything she owned, 2 dresses, a few books, her mother's cameo brooch, not much to show for 26 years. "I'm getting out." The door swung open and the storm swallowed her whole. Shut. The cold hit first, rain so heavy it felt like drowning on dry land. Eleanor stumbled down from the coach, her boots sinking into mud that sucked at her heels. The wind tore at her bonnet, ripped it clean off her head before she could catch it. She watched it tumble away into the darkness, a flash of blue fabric disappearing into nothing. Wait, but the driver was already climbing back up, already snapping the reins. The horses lunged forward and the stagecoach pulled away, wheels churning through the mud, taillights fading into the rain. And then she was alone. Completely, utterly alone. Eleanor stood there, bag clutched to her chest, rain plastering her hair to her face. The road, if you could call it that, stretched ahead and behind, a muddy ribbon disappearing into gray. No landmarks, no signs, just endless prairie and the storm pressing down like a weight. She started walking. Each step was a fight. The mud grabbed at her boots, tried to pull her down. Her skirts were already soaked, heavy as iron, dragging through the muck. The rain blurred her vision, turned the world into smears of dark and darker. Lightning cracked overhead, close enough that she felt the static raise the hair on her arms. 3 miles, the driver had said. Maybe 4. She'd walked less than 1 when her foot caught on something, a root, a rock, she couldn't tell. And she went down hard. The bag flew from her hands, hit the ground and burst open. Everything inside spilled into the mud. Her dresses, her books, her mother's brooch. No, 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 no. Eleanor scrambled forward on her hands and knees, grabbing at fabric, at pages already dissolving in the rain. The brooch gleamed for a second in the mud, and she snatched it, stuffed it into her pocket before it could vanish. But the rest was ruined. She tried to shove the wet dresses back into the bag, but they wouldn't fit, wouldn't cooperate, and her hands were shaking too hard to make them. A sound tore from her throat. Not quite a sob. Something raw. This was a mistake. All of it. Coming here, answering that ad, believing that a man she'd never met could offer her anything but more loss. She should have stayed in Philadelphia, should have found another teaching position, or work as a sea maid, or something. Anything but this. She sat back on her heels, rain streaming down her face, and let herself break just a little. Then she heard it. Hoofbeats, faint at first, almost lost in the storm, but growing louder, closer. Eleanor's head snapped up. Through the rain, she saw a shape moving toward her, a horse and rider, dark against the storm. For a second, relief flooded through her so strong it made her dizzy. Someone was coming. She wasn't alone anymore. Then the horse got closer and she saw the rider's face, and the relief curdled into something else. He was big. That was the first thing she noticed. Broad-shouldered, rough-edged, face hidden beneath the brim of a soaked hat. He pulled the horse to a stop a few feet away and just sat there, looking down at her. Not speaking, not moving, just watching her kneel in the mud like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite figure out. "You, Eleanor Whitmore?" His voice was low, rough as gravel. She nodded, couldn't find her voice. "You hurt?" No, I'm fine." "You don't look fine." Eleanor pushed herself to her feet, swaying slightly. Her legs felt like water. "The stagecoach left me. I was trying to... My bag broke and I can see that." He swung down from the horse in one smooth motion, boots hitting the mud with a wet squelch. Up close, he was even bigger than she'd thought, tall enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. His face was hard-lined, weathered, with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow. Not old, maybe 30, but he looked like he'd lived longer. This was Caleb Ryder. Had to be. He crouched down, started gathering her scattered belongings with quick, efficient movements. Didn't ask permission, didn't say anything, just picked up the ruined dresses, the soaked books, stuffed them back into the bag. "You shouldn't have come." He said it quietly, almost to himself. Eleanor stiffened. "Excuse me?" "I said you shouldn't have come. Not in this weather. Should have waited." "I didn't know there'd be a storm." "There's always a storm." He straightened, holding her bag in one hand. "You ready?" "For what?" "To get out of the rain." He moved toward the horse, and she realized he meant for her to ride with him, share the saddle, press up against this stranger who'd just told her she shouldn't have come. "I can walk," she said. Caleb stopped, turned back to look at her. Rain dripped from the brim of his hat. "It's 3 miles, in the dark, through a storm. You really want to walk?" "I don't..." She faltered. Didn't know how to finish that sentence. Didn't want to admit that getting on that horse with him felt more dangerous than staying in the storm. He sighed, hooked her bag over the saddle horn, and pulled himself up. "Suit yourself. I'll ride slow. You can follow." Then he started forward, and Eleanor realized he was serious. He was actually going to leave her. Again. "Wait!" He pulled the horse to a stop but didn't look back. Eleanor's throat tightened. Pride warred with practicality, and practicality won because pride didn't keep you alive on the frontier. She stumbled forward, reached up for his outstretched hand. His grip was iron strong. He pulled her up behind him like she weighed nothing, settled her on the horse's back. She had to wrap her arms around his waist to keep from sliding off, could feel the solid muscle beneath his wet coat, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. "Hold on," he said. Then they were moving. The ride was silent except for the storm. Eleanor clung to Caleb's back, face pressed against his shoulder, rain soaking through to her skin. The horse picked its way carefully through the mud, steady and sure-footed. Caleb guided it with small shifts of his weight, one hand on the reins, the other resting on her arm, keeping her anchored. She wanted to say something, anything, break the awful tension stretched between them, but her mind was blank, scraped clean by cold and exhaustion and the surreal reality of this moment. This was the man she was supposed to marry. In his letters, he'd seemed different. Still blunt, still rough around the edges, but there'd been something else too. A thread of loneliness that matched her own. He'd written about the land like it mattered to him, about building something that would last. He'd asked about her life in Philadelphia, actually seemed interested in her answers. Now he felt like a wall, solid and impenetrable. "How did you know I'd be there?" she asked finally. Had to raise her voice to be heard over the storm. Stage driver sent word ahead when you boarded in San Antonio. I was waiting at the junction. When the coach came through without you, figured you'd been dropped early. So you came looking. Seemed like the thing to do. She wanted to thank him, but the words felt inadequate. Instead, she asked, "Is it always like this?" The weather? Everything. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, mostly, not reassuring, but honest. The ranch appeared out of the darkness like a mirage. One moment there was nothing, and the next, buildings. A main house, low and sprawling. A barn. Fences disappearing into shadow. It wasn't much, but after miles of empty prairie, it looked like salvation. Caleb dismounted first, then reached up to help her down. Eleanor's legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground. She grabbed at his arm to steady herself and felt him tense under her hand. "You need to get inside, get dry." His voice was carefully neutral. "I'll see to the horse." "I can help." "You can barely stand." Not cruel, just factual. Inside. There's a fire going, towels on the shelf by the door. Then he was leading the horse toward the barn, leaving her alone in the rain again. Eleanor looked at the house. Light glowed behind the windows, warm and inviting. The door was 20 feet away. It might as well have been 20 miles. She forced herself forward. One step. Another. Her boots made wet, squelching sounds on the wooden porch. The door wasn't locked. She pushed it open and stumbled inside. The warmth hit her like a fist. After hours in the cold, it felt almost painful. She stood there dripping on the floor, taking in her surroundings. The room was sparse but clean. A fireplace dominated one wall, flames crackling behind an iron grate. A table with 2 chairs, a rocking chair by the window. Shelves lined with books, more than she'd expected. Everything was orderly, purposeful. No decoration, no softness, but not harsh either. Just functional. This was going to be her home. The thought made her stomach twist. Eleanor found the towels where Caleb had said they'd be. Peeled off her wet coat, tried to wring out her hair. It didn't help much. She was soaked through, chilled to the bone, and exhausted in a way that went beyond physical. The door opened and Caleb came in, shaking rain from his hat. He glanced at her, then moved to the fireplace, added another log. "There's a room." He gestured toward a door on the far wall. "You can change, get warm." "Thank you." He nodded but didn't look at her, just stood there, silhouetted against the fire, and the distance between them felt like a canyon. Eleanor wanted to say something, address the obvious, but she didn't know where to start. Caleb did it for her. "We don't have to do this." His voice was quiet. "If you want to leave, I'll take you back to San Antonio in the morning. Pay your fare back east. No hard feelings." The offer should have been a relief. Instead, it felt like a door slamming shut. "Is that what you want?" she asked. He turned to face her then. His expression was unreadable. "I want you to be sure. This life, it's not what you're used to, won't ever be. And I'm not—" He stopped, started again. "I'm not easy to live with. Ask anyone in town. I didn't come here expecting easy." "Then what did you expect?" The question hung between them, sharp and real. Eleanor thought about the letters, about the careful way he'd described his life, never sugarcoating, but never completely honest either. She'd filled in the gaps with imagination, created a picture that probably had nothing to do with reality. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I'm here now, and I don't have anywhere else to go." Something shifted in his expression, not quite softening, but close. "That's not a good reason to stay." "Maybe not," she lifted her chin, "but it's my reason, and it's honest." For a long moment, they just looked at each other. The fire crackled, rain drummed on the roof. Somewhere outside, the wind howled. Then Caleb nodded slowly. "All right, we'll figure it out." It wasn't a promise, wasn't even reassurance, but it was something. Eleanor took it. Thus, the room Caleb showed her to was small but dry. A bed with clean sheets, a washstand, a trunk at the foot of the bed. The window looked out over darkness. "I'll sleep in the barn," Caleb said from the doorway. "Give you space." "You don't have to, yeah, I do." His tone left no room for argument. "We're not married yet. Wouldn't be right." He left before she could respond. Eleanor heard his boots on the floor, the front door opening and closing. Then silence. She sat on the bed, still wearing her wet dress, and let herself process everything that had happened. The stagecoach, the storm, the man who was supposed to be her husband, watching her with guarded eyes. This wasn't how she'd imagined it. In her mind, there'd been some kind of recognition, a spark of connection maybe, something to build on. Instead, there was just uncertainty and distance, and the horrible knowledge that she'd gambled everything on a man who might not want her here at all. Eleanor looked at her hands. They'd stopped shaking. That was something. She stood, peeled off the wet dress with numb fingers, hung it over the chair to dry, found a nightgown in the trunk, worn but clean, smelling faintly of lavender. It was too big, probably Caleb's mother's or sister's, but she didn't care. She pulled it on, crawled under the blankets, and closed her eyes. Sleep didn't come. Outside, the storm raged on. Morning broke gray and cold. Eleanor woke to silence. The rain had stopped sometime in the night, leaving behind mud and mist. She dressed quickly in the only dry dress she had left, a simple brown calico, more practical than pretty, fixed her hair as best she could without a mirror. When she emerged from the room, Caleb was already up. He stood at the stove, cooking something that smelled like bacon and coffee. He glanced at her when she entered, nodded once. "You sleep?" "Some." A lie, but a polite one. "Coffee's hot. Bacon's almost done." She poured herself a cup, wrapped her hands around the warmth. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint. She drank it anyway. They ate in silence. Eleanor tried not to stare, but she couldn't help studying him in daylight. The scar through his eyebrow, the calluses on his hands, the way he moved, economical, deliberate, like every action had a purpose. "I need to check the cattle," he said when he'd finished eating. "Storm might have scattered them. You can come if you want, see the place." It wasn't quite an invitation, more like an afterthought, but Eleanor took it. "I'd like that." The land was bigger than she'd imagined. They rode out together. Eleanor on a gentle mare Caleb said was named Rosie. The storm had turned everything to mud, but beneath it she could see the bones of something, rolling hills, clusters of trees, a creek running through the valley. "How much is yours?" she asked. 200 acres. Used to be more, but I sold off the north section when prices were good, kept the best grazing land." "How many cattle?" 40 head. "Not much, but it's enough. For now." He pointed out landmarks as they rode, the windbreak he'd planted 5 years ago, still struggling to take root, the old line shack where he sheltered during winter storms, the creek that sometimes ran dry in August. Eleanor listened, storing it all away. This was her world now. She needed to understand it. They found the cattle scattered but mostly unharmed. A few had gotten themselves tangled in fence wire. Caleb dismounted and waded into the mud to free them, cursing under his breath when one kicked him in the shin. Eleanor watched from the saddle. He worked with quick efficiency, no wasted movement. When a young calf got separated from its mother, bawling in panic, she saw the way he gentled it, patient, steady, waiting for it to calm before guiding it back. It was the first time she'd seen him soft. "You're good with them," she said when he climbed back onto his horse. Caleb shrugged. "They're easier than people." "Why's that?" "Cattle don't expect things you can't give." The words landed heavy between them. Eleanor wanted to ask what he meant, what he thought she expected. But the walls were back up, and she didn't know how to scale them. They rode on. The town appeared mid-afternoon, if you could call it a town. A dozen buildings clustered around a dirt road. General store, saloon, church, a few houses. Not much else. "We need supplies," Caleb explained. "Figured you might want to meet folks." Eleanor wasn't sure she did, but she nodded anyway. The general store smelled like tobacco and sawdust. Behind the counter, a thin man with suspicious eyes looked them over as they entered. "Caleb?" He nodded. Then his gaze shifted to Eleanor, sharp and assessing. "This the bride?" "Eleanor Whitmore," Caleb said. "Eleanor, this is Walt Monroe, runs the store." Walt's handshake was brief, his palm dry and cool. "Heard you were coming. Whole town's been talking." "Have they?" Eleanor kept her voice level. "Not every day someone answers one of those ads, especially a lady from back east." His tone made it clear what he thought of ladies from back east. I'm sure they'll find something else to talk about soon enough. Walt laughed, short and sharp. Don't count on it. Not much happens here. They bought flour, sugar, salt, basic staples. Walt tallied up the cost with slow deliberation, making small talk that felt more like interrogation. Where was she from exactly? What brought her out here? Did she know what she was getting into? Eleanor answered politely, kept her voice even. But inside, anger simmered. Outside, Caleb loaded the supplies onto the horse in silence. They're not all like that, he said finally. I don't care if they are. He glanced at her. You should. This is a small town. People talk, and they'll be watching to see if we make it. Make it? The marriage. He said it bluntly. Half the town thinks I'm crazy for mail ordering a wife. Other half thinks you're desperate or stupid. They're waiting to see who's right. Eleanor's jaw tightened. And what do you think? I think it's none of their business. He swung up into the saddle. But it'll be easier if you have friends here. Someone to talk to besides me. It was the most he'd said all day, and despite everything, Eleanor felt something crack in her chest. Because he was right, and because underneath the gruffness, there was something almost like concern. I'll try, she said. He nodded, offered his hand to pull her up behind him. This time, when she wrapped her arms around his waist, it felt a little less strange. Bust. That night, Caleb taught her how to make biscuits. It wasn't planned. Eleanor had offered to cook dinner, wanting to be useful, and had promptly proven she had no idea how to work a wood stove. The first batch of biscuits came out black on the bottom, raw on top. Caleb looked at them, looked at her, didn't say anything. I'm a school teacher, Eleanor said defensively, not a cook. Can see that. I can learn. You'll have to. He moved to the counter, started pulling out ingredients. Come here. I'll show you. She stood beside him, watching as he measured flour by feel, cut and lard with a fork, added milk in careful increments. His hands were huge, scarred, completely unsuited for delicate work, but they moved with surprising grace. Don't overwork the dough, he said. That's what makes them tough. Just bring it together, pat it out flat, cut your rounds. Eleanor tried. Her dough was stickier than his, messier, but it came together. She cut careful circles, placed them in the pan. This time, they came out golden, flaky, almost good. Better, Caleb said. High praise, apparently. They ate them with butter and honey. The conversation was stilted at first, awkward silences stretching between bites. But slowly, carefully, they found safe topics. The weather, the cattle, small, practical things. Why a rancher? Eleanor asked eventually. Why not something else? Caleb considered. My father ranched. His father before him. Seemed like what I was supposed to do. And is it? What you want? He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw something flicker in his eyes. Never thought much about wanting, just about surviving. That's a sad way to live. It's an honest one. Eleanor didn't have an answer for that. Later, after Caleb had gone to the barn, and she was alone again in the small room, she thought about his words. About the difference between surviving and living. About whether it was possible to build something real on a foundation of desperation. She didn't know. But she was starting to suspect that Caleb didn't know either, and maybe, just maybe, they could figure it out together. Outside, the night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like spilled salt. Eleanor pressed her hand against the window glass, felt the cold seep into her palm. 3 days until the wedding. 3 days to decide if she was brave enough to bet her entire future on a man who barely spoke, who watched her like she might disappear, who made biscuits with scarred hands and talked about surviving instead of living. 3 days to figure out if this gamble would save her or destroy her. Eleanor closed her eyes, hoped for the former, expected the latter. And somewhere in the darkness she heard Caleb moving in the barn, awake, like her, waiting for morning. The morning of the second day, Eleanor woke to the sound of someone chopping wood. She dressed quickly, splashed cold water on her face from the basin, and stepped outside. The air was crisp, carrying the smell of damp earth and smoke. Caleb stood by the woodpile, axe raised, bringing it down in clean, powerful strokes. His shirt was already damp with sweat despite the cool morning. He didn't notice her at first. Eleanor watched him work, the rhythm of it, lift, swing, split. each movement precise, efficient, like everything else he did. "You're up early," she said. The axe paused mid-swing. Caleb glanced over his shoulder. "Cattle don't sleep in. Need help? You know how to chop wood?" "No, but I can learn." Something almost like amusement flickered across his face. "Maybe later. Right now I need you to do something else." "What's that?" He drove the axe into the chopping block, left it there, wiped his hands on his pants. "Come with me." He led her to the barn, to a stall in the back corner. Inside, a cow lay on her side, breathing hard. Her flanks were swollen, her eyes rolling white. "She's calving," Caleb said. "Been at it since before dawn. Something's wrong." Eleanor's stomach tightened. "What do you need me to do?" "Hold the lantern, and don't faint." "I won't faint." He looked at her skeptically, but handed her the lantern anyway. Then he knelt in the straw beside the cow, murmuring something low and soothing. His hands moved over her belly, gentle despite their size. "Calf's breech," he said. "I need to turn it." Eleanor had seen birth before. Her mother had worked as a midwife in Philadelphia, sometimes brought Eleanor along when she was older. But this was different, messier. The cow bellowed, a sound of pure animal fear, and Caleb's arm disappeared inside her up to the shoulder. "Easy," he said. Not to Eleanor, to the cow. "Easy now." Minutes stretched. The cow thrashed. Caleb worked with grim concentration, sweat dripping down his face. Eleanor held the lantern steady, forcing herself to watch, to not look away. Then suddenly, movement. A shift. Caleb pulled back and the calf came with him, slick and steaming in the cold air. It lay motionless in the straw. "Is it?" Caleb didn't answer, just grabbed a handful of straw and started rubbing the calf's chest, rough and vigorous. Once. Twice. Eleanor's throat closed. Then the calf gasped, shuddered, drew breath. Caleb sat back on his heels, chest heaving. "There you go." The mother cow lifted her head, made a low sound. The calf struggled to stand on spindly legs, failed, tried again. This time it made it, wobbled over to its mother and started nursing. Eleanor realized she was shaking. "You all right?" Caleb asked. "Yes, I thought we'd lost it." "Almost did." He stood, wiped his hands on a rag. His shirt was covered in blood, and worse. But almost doesn't count. They walked back to the house in silence. The sun was fully up now, painting the sky pale gold. Eleanor's hands were still trembling slightly. Not from fear, from something else. The strange intimacy of what they'd just shared. Him trusting her to be steady. Her not letting him down. "You did good," Caleb said as they reached the porch. It was the first real compliment he'd given her. Eleanor felt warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you." He nodded, started to turn away, then stopped. "Eleanor." "Yes?" "I'm glad you didn't faint." This time she was almost sure she saw him smile. The town had a dressmaker. Mrs. Harriet Chen, a sharp-eyed woman who'd come west from San Francisco and decided she preferred small-town Texas to the chaos of the coast. Her shop was a narrow building wedged between the saloon and the church, which she said was good for business. She got customers coming and going. Eleanor met her on the third day when Caleb suggested she might want a new dress for the wedding. "I have a dress," Eleanor said. "You have a brown work dress that's seen better days. And whatever got ruined in the storm." He pulled a few bills from his pocket, held them out. "Get something nice, if you want." She stared at the money. It wasn't much, but from a man like Caleb, it felt like a fortune. "I know you don't need it. I'm saying you should have it." His jaw tightened. "A woman should have a decent dress for her wedding, even if it's to someone like me." The self-deprecation in his voice made her chest ache. She took the money. Mrs. Chen's shop smelled like lavender and sizing. Bolts of fabric lined the walls, calico and cotton, a few silks that looked painfully out of place on the frontier. The dressmaker herself sat by the window, hand-stitching a hem with tiny, perfect stitches. "You're the bride," she said without looking up. "Yes." "Caleb Ryder's bride." "That's right." Now Mrs. Chen did look up. Her eyes were dark, intelligent, missing nothing. "He's a good man, quiet, but good. Doesn't come to town much. Keeps to himself." "I've noticed." You know why? Eleanor hesitated. Not really. Mrs. Chen set down her sewing. He was engaged before, 5 years ago, girl from Austin. Pretty thing, full of plans about fixing up the ranch, making it proper. She lasted 3 months, left without a word. Took the ring and half his savings. The words landed like stones. Eleanor felt something shift in her understanding. He didn't mention that. Wouldn't. Caleb's not one for talking about what hurts. Mrs. Chen stood, moved to the fabric shelves. But you should know. That's why he watches you like you might disappear, because the last one did. Eleanor's throat tightened. She thought about the careful distance Caleb maintained, the way he slept in the barn, how he'd offered to send her back east, no hard feelings. He was protecting himself, expecting her to leave too. I'm not her, Eleanor said quietly. No, I don't think you are. Mrs. Chen pulled down a bolt of deep blue cotton. But you'll have to prove it. Now, let's make you a dress that'll knock some sense into that stubborn man. The dress took 2 days. Eleanor came back for fittings, stood still while Mrs. Chen pinned and tucked and adjusted. They talked while she worked about the town, the people, the rhythm of life out here. Most folks are good, Mrs. Chen said around a mouthful of pins. Suspicious of outsiders at first, but they come around. Walt at the store is harmless, just likes to gossip. The Reverend's wife, Martha, she'll try to save your soul, but she means well. Doc Preston drinks too much, but he's steady in a crisis. And Caleb? How do people see him? Mrs. Chen's hands paused. They respect him. He works hard, pays his debts, doesn't cause trouble. But they don't know him. He doesn't let them. Does he let anyone? Not since Sarah left. Sarah? The girl from Austin now had a name. Eleanor looked at her reflection in the small mirror Mrs. Chen had propped against the wall. The dress was taking shape. Simple lines, fitted bodice, skirt that would move when she walked. The blue brought out her eyes, made her look less tired. What if I can't reach him? She asked. Then you'll have a quiet marriage and a roof over your head. Could be worse. Could be better too, Mrs. Chen smiled. Could be, but better takes work. You willing to do it? Eleanor thought about Caleb's hands, gentle on the struggling calf. The way he'd taught her to make biscuits without making her feel stupid. How he'd come looking for her in the storm. Yes, she said. I think I am. The night before the wedding, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She lay in the narrow bed, listening to the house settle around her. Caleb was in the barn again. He'd been polite at dinner, quiet, barely meeting her eyes, like he was already pulling away. Tomorrow they'd stand in front of the Reverend and make promises. Forever promises. To a man she barely knew, who barely knew her. Eleanor threw off the blanket, pulled a shawl around her shoulders, and slipped outside. The barn was dark except for a single lantern hanging from a hook. Caleb sat on a hay bale, whittling something with a pocket knife. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his face. Can't sleep? He asked. No. Me neither. She moved closer, saw what he was carving. A small horse, rough but recognizable. That's good. It's something to do with my hands. He turned it over, examining it. Used to make them for my sister's kids. Before. Before what? Before she moved to Colorado with her husband. Haven't seen them in 3 years. There was loneliness in his voice, raw and undisguised. Eleanor sat down on the hay bale beside him, leaving a careful space between them. Tell me about them, she said. He did. Slowly at first, then with growing ease. About his sister Mary, who'd raised him after their parents died. About her husband Thomas, a good man who worked the railroad. About their 2 boys, wild as colts, always climbing something they shouldn't. Mary wrote, Caleb said, after Sarah left. Said I was a fool for trying again. That I should sell the ranch, come to Colorado, start over. Why didn't you? Because this is mine. My father built it, my grandfather before him. It's not much, but it's what I have. He set down the knife. And I'm tired of running from things that hurt. Eleanor's chest tightened. Is that what you think I am? Another thing that's going to hurt? I think you're a stranger who answered an ad because she had nowhere else to go. And I'm a lonely man who wrote that ad because he was tired of eating dinner alone. His voice was rough. I think we're both gambling on something that might not work. You're right. She met his eyes. But we're here anyway. And tomorrow we're getting married. So maybe instead of waiting for it to fall apart, we could try making it work. You make it sound simple. It's not. But it's not impossible either. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. In the lamplight, his face was all hard angles and shadows. But his eyes were uncertain, almost hopeful. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. Neither do I. Sarah, she wanted things I couldn't give her. Parties, pretty dresses, trips to Austin. She thought she could change me, make me into something softer. I don't want to change you. Then what do you want? Eleanor thought about it, really thought. A partnership. Someone to build something with. A life that's more than just surviving. She paused. And maybe, eventually, someone who doesn't sleep in the barn. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. Eventually? We have time. Do we? We have as much as we make. He nodded slowly, picked up the carving again, tested the edge of the horse's leg with his thumb. I can't promise I'll be easy to live with. I'm not asking for easy, I'm asking for honest. That I can do. Then we'll start there. They sat in silence for a while. Comfortable silence this time. The barn smelled like hay and horses and the sharp scent of wood shavings. Outside, night sounds drifted in. Crickets, the distant yip of a coyote, wind in the grass. You should get some sleep, Caleb said finally. Tomorrow's going to be long. So should you. I will. In a bit. Eleanor stood, started toward the door, then turned back. Caleb? Yeah? I'm not her. I'm not Sarah. I won't leave. His hand stilled on the carving. For a moment she thought he wouldn't respond, then, I believe you. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Yeah. The wedding was set for noon. Eleanor woke early, nerves jumping in her stomach. She washed carefully, fixed her hair with pins Mrs. Chen had loaned her. The blue dress fit perfectly. She looked at herself in the small mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked like a bride. There was a knock at the door. Eleanor? Caleb's voice. I'm heading to town. You need a ride? She opened the door. He stood there in a clean shirt, hair still damp from washing, looking as nervous as she felt. His eyes widened when he saw her. You look... He stopped, started again. The dress is nice. Thank you. Blue suits you. Her cheeks warmed. You clean up well yourself. He ducked his head, almost shy. It made him look younger, less guarded. We should go. Don't want to be late. They rode to town together, Eleanor side saddle on Rosie, Caleb on his gelding. The morning was clear, the sky so blue it hurt to look at. Perfect weather for a wedding, if you believed in signs. The church was small, white-painted, with a crooked steeple. A handful of people had gathered outside, Mrs. Chen, Walt from the store, Doc Preston looking rumpled in a too-tight suit. The Reverend's wife, Martha, severe in black. A few ranch hands Caleb knew. Not many, but more than Eleanor had expected. Didn't think anyone would come, she murmured. Small town, Caleb said. Weddings or entertainment. Inside, the church smelled like old wood and candle wax. The Reverend waited at the front, a thin man with kind eyes and ink-stained fingers. He nodded as they approached. Caleb. Miss Whitmore. Are we ready? Eleanor's mouth was dry. She nodded. They stood before the Reverend. Caleb's hand found hers, his palm warm and calloused. She could feel his pulse, quick and hard. He was as scared as she was. The Reverend began. The words washed over her, traditional, formal, weighty with meaning. Love, honor, cherish, in sickness and health, till death, forever promises. When it came time for the vows, Caleb's voice was steady. I do. Eleanor's turn. 2 words that would change everything. She looked at Caleb, this rough, guarded man who'd come for her in a storm, who'd taught her to make biscuits and trusted her with a difficult birth, who was trying so hard not to hope for too much. I do, the Reverend smiled. Then, by the authority vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Caleb, you may kiss your bride. Caleb looked at her. Eleanor saw the question in his eyes. She nodded just slightly. He leaned in. The kiss was brief, careful. his lips barely brushing hers, but it was real, a promise in itself. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright. "Hello, Mrs. Ryder," he said softly. Eleanor's heart squeezed. "Hello, husband, us." There was a small reception at the saloon. Not traditional, but the saloon was the only building big enough to hold everyone. The owner had cleared out a corner, set up tables with food, roasted chicken, biscuits, greens, a cake Mrs. Chen had baked. People congratulated them with varying degrees of sincerity. Walt shook Caleb's hand, told Eleanor she'd done well for herself. Doc Preston toasted them with whiskey, his hand only shaking a little. Martha kissed Eleanor's cheek and whispered that she'd pray for them, which Eleanor chose to take as kindness. Mrs. Chen pulled her aside. "How are you holding up?" "I'm married." Eleanor said it like she couldn't quite believe it. "You are? And? And I have no idea what happens now." Mrs. Chen laughed. "Same thing that happened yesterday. You wake up, you work, you figure each other out. Just now you've got a piece of paper saying you're stuck with each other. That's not very romantic." "Romance is for novels. Marriage is work." She squeezed Eleanor's hand. "But it can be good work, if you both want it." Across the room, Caleb was talking to one of the ranch hands, a young man with sunburned skin and an easy smile. Caleb looked uncomfortable with the attention, but was making an effort. For her, Eleanor realized. "He's trying," Mrs. Chen said, following her gaze. "So am I." "I know. That's why I think you'll make it." They left the reception as the sun started its descent. Caleb helped Eleanor onto her horse, his hand lingering a moment longer than necessary. Their eyes met. "You ready to go home?" he asked. Home. The word settled in her chest, strange and new. Yes. The ride back was quiet. Eleanor was exhausted, from nerves, from smiling, from the weight of what she'd just done. Beside her, Caleb seemed lost in thought. When they reached the ranch, he dismounted first, then helped her down. His hand circled her waist, steady and sure. For a moment they stood there, too close, not close enough. "I'll see to the horses," he said. "Caleb, wait." He paused. Eleanor took a breath. "You don't have to sleep in the barn tonight." His expression shifted. Surprise, uncertainty, something that might have been hope. "Eleanor, I'm not saying, I just mean you shouldn't have to sleep in the barn. It's your house. We can share the space. We're married now. We barely know each other. Then we'll get to know each other." She lifted her chin. "I'm not afraid of you. Maybe you should be. I don't know how to be a husband. And I don't know how to be a wife, so we'll learn together." She stepped closer. "Unless you don't want to. It's not about wanting." His voice was rough. "I don't want to hurt you or disappoint you. You won't. You can't know that." "No. But I can choose to trust you anyway." She reached out, took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, almost reflexively. "We're in this now, Caleb. Both of us. So let's stop pretending we're not." For a long moment he didn't move. Then slowly he nodded. "All right." They went inside together. Caleb built up the fire while Eleanor changed out of the blue dress, hanging it carefully in the wardrobe. When she came out in her nightgown and robe, he was sitting at the table, whittling again. The same nervous habit. "What are you making?" she asked. "Nothing. Just keeping my hands busy." She sat across from him, watched the wood curl away under his knife. "Tell me something." "Like what?" "Anything. Something I don't know." He thought about it. "I wanted to be a teacher when I was young, like you." Eleanor blinked. "Really?" "Loved books. Still do. Thought it would be good, helping kids learn, opening up the world for them." He smiled, but it was sad. "My father needed me on the ranch, so that was that." "You could still teach, in town maybe. No money in it, and I've got cattle to manage." "But if you could?" "If I could, yeah, I'd teach." He set down the knife. "What about you? You ever want to do something else?" "I wanted to travel, see places that weren't Philadelphia, Paris, London, even just New York." She laughed. "I got Texas instead." "That's not what you hoped for." "No, but maybe it's what I needed." They talked late into the night. Small revelations, careful truths. Caleb told her about growing up on the ranch, about the drought that killed half their herd when he was 16. Eleanor told him about her parents, her mother's death, the boarding house where she'd felt invisible. The fire burned low. The candles guttered. Finally, Caleb stood. "I should let you sleep." "Where are you going?" He hesitated. "I thought, the barn." "No." Eleanor stood too. Her heart was hammering. "Stay, please." "Eleanor, I can't. We shouldn't." "I know. I'm not asking for that. I'm just asking you to stay in your own house, in your own bed. We can—" She faltered. "We can figure out the rest later." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. They lay in the darkness, a careful space between them on the bed. Eleanor could hear his breathing, feel the warmth of him beside her. It was strange, intimate, terrifying. "Eleanor?" His voice was quiet in the dark. "Yes?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For staying." Her throat closed. She reached out, found his hand, laced her fingers through his. "Thank you for coming to find me in the storm." His grip tightened, just a little, just enough. They fell asleep like that, hands linked, two strangers trying to become something more. Outside, the night settled over the ranch. Stars wheeled overhead. The cattle lowed softly. And inside the small house, two people who'd gambled everything on a few letters and a desperate hope began to build something that might, against all odds, become real. Morning came too soon and not soon enough. Eleanor woke to find Caleb's side of the bed empty, the sheets still warm where he'd been. She lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, processing the fact that she was married, that she'd slept beside a man, her husband, and nothing terrible had happened. They'd just been. The smell of coffee drifted in from the main room. She dressed quickly, braided her hair, and emerged to find Caleb at the stove, frying eggs. "Morning," he said without turning around. "Morning." "Coffee's ready. Eggs will be done in a minute." They ate in companionable silence. Not the heavy, awkward quiet of before, but something easier. Eleanor watched him over the rim of her cup, noticed the way his hair curled slightly at his neck, still damp from washing. The scar through his eyebrow caught the light. "What happened?" she asked, gesturing to it. He touched it absently. "Bull got me when I was 17, hooked me right above the eye. Lucky it wasn't lower." "Does it still hurt?" "Only when it rains." He finished his eggs, pushed back from the table. "I need to ride out to the north pasture today. Check the fences after that storm. You want to come?" It wasn't quite an invitation, more like he was testing something, seeing if she'd say yes. "I'd like that." Something in his expression softened. "Good. Bring a canteen. It'll be hot." They rode out together under a sky so blue it looked painted. The land stretched endlessly in all directions, grass rippling like water, scattered mesquite trees, the distant line of hills purple against the horizon. Eleanor had never seen so much space. It made her feel small and significant all at once. "Tell me about the ranch," she said. "How it works." Caleb glanced at her. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. If I'm going to live here, I should understand it." So he told her about rotational grazing and water management, about the cycle of calving and weaning and selling, the delicate balance of rain and grass and market prices. He talked with his hands, gesturing toward landmarks she was learning to recognize. "It's not romantic," he said. "Mostly it's worry. Will it rain enough? Will the cattle stay healthy? Will prices hold? You're always one bad season away from losing everything. But you keep doing it. It's what I know." He paused. "And there's something about it. Working the land, seeing the results of what you do. When it works, when a calf is born healthy, or the grass comes back after drought, it feels like you've done something that matters." Eleanor heard the passion beneath his words. This rough, quiet man loved his land in a way that went bone deep. They reached the north fence line, and Caleb dismounted, walked along it checking posts and wire. Eleanor watched him work, saw how he tested each connection, tightened what was loose, made mental notes of what needed replacing. "How'd you learn all this?" she asked. "My father. He could fix anything, build anything, had a sense for the land." Caleb's voice went soft. He died when I was 19. Heart gave out while he was hauling water during a drought. Found him by the well. I'm sorry. He shrugged, but she saw the grief flicker across his face. Long time ago. But I think about him every time I do this work. Wonder if he'd think I was doing it right. I'm sure he would. Maybe. He moved to the next post. Your parents. You said your mother died. What about your father? Eleanor's chest tightened. He died 6 months after she did. Doctor said it was pneumonia, but I think it was a broken heart. They loved each other, really loved each other, the kind that doesn't make sense to anyone else. Must have been hard watching that. It was. But it was also beautiful to see two people so completely devoted. She looked at Caleb. Is that what you want? That kind of marriage? He straightened, met her eyes. I don't know if I'm capable of it. Why not? Because I'm not good at letting people in. Sarah figured that out quick enough. There it was again. Sarah, the ghost between them. Tell me about her, Eleanor said. Really tell me. Not just that she left. Caleb was quiet for a long time. They walked along the fence line, the sun climbing higher, heat beginning to press down. Finally he spoke. Met her in Austin. I'd gone to sell cattle. She was working in a restaurant. Said she was tired of city life, wanted something different. She was pretty, charming. Made me feel like maybe I wasn't just some dirt-poor rancher. He kicked at a rock. We got engaged fast, too fast. I brought her here and she hated it. Hated the isolation, the work, the dirt. Hated me, I think, for not being what she'd imagined. What happened? She stayed 3 months, complained every day. I tried to make it better, bought her things we couldn't afford, talked about building a bigger house someday. But it was never enough. Then one morning I woke up and she was gone. Took the engagement ring, the money I'd saved for winter supplies, and caught a stage back to Austin. His jaw tightened. Left a note saying she'd made a mistake. That I was a good man, but she deserved better than this. The pain in his voice was raw, unhealed. That's why you offered to send me back, Eleanor said. Why you keep expecting me to leave. Can you blame me? No. But I'm not her, Caleb. I told you that. I know. But knowing and believing are different things. Eleanor stopped walking, turned to face him fully. Then what do I have to do? To make you believe? He looked at her, really looked. His eyes were the color of winter sky, searching, uncertain. I don't know, he admitted. Maybe just stay. Keep staying until it becomes real. I can do that. Can you? Even when it's hard, when the loneliness sets in and you start wondering if you made the right choice? Yes, she said it firmly. Because I'm not looking for easy, Caleb. I'm looking for solid, and you're the most solid thing I've found. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite trust, but maybe the beginning of it. He reached out, touched her cheek with the back of his hand. Gentle, tentative. I want to believe you. Then believe me. They stood there in the heat and the silence, the fence stretching away behind them, the land rolling on forever. Then Caleb dropped his hand and cleared his throat. We should keep moving. Got another mile to check. But as they walked, Eleanor noticed he stayed closer. And when the ground was rough, he offered his hand to steady her. Small things. But they felt like progress. They made it back to the ranch as afternoon shadows lengthened. Eleanor was sunburned, thirsty, exhausted in a way she'd never been from teaching school. But there was satisfaction in it too, the bone-deep tiredness that came from real work. You did good today, Caleb said as they unsaddled the horses. I barely did anything. You came. You paid attention. You didn't complain. He rubbed down his gelding with practiced efficiency. That's more than most would do. Eleanor brushed Rosie's flank, copied Caleb's movements. I want to learn, all of it. How to manage the ranch, handle the animals, fix things. I don't want to be useless. You're not useless. I can't cook properly, can't mend a fence. Don't know the first thing about cattle. You can learn. He glanced at her. If you want to. I do. Then I'll teach you. It was a promise. Small, but real. That night, Eleanor tried to make dinner and nearly burned the house down. She'd left the pan on the stove too long while trying to knead bread, and the grease caught fire. Caleb came running at her shout, grabbed the pan barehanded and threw it outside, then stood there cursing and shaking his burned fingers. "Let me see," Eleanor said, her heart hammering. "It's fine. It's not fine. Let me see." He held out his hand reluctantly. The palm was bright red, already blistering. Eleanor's stomach twisted with guilt. "I'm so sorry. I wasn't paying attention, and it happens." His voice was tight with pain. "Just get me some water, cold as you can." She pumped water into a basin, added what little ice they had from the cold cellar. Caleb plunged his hand in with a hiss. "Does this happen to you often?" Eleanor asked. "Getting hurt?" "Often enough. Comes with the work." "And you just deal with it? Alone?" "What else would I do?" She didn't have an answer, just sat beside him while he kept his hand in the water, watching the pain lines around his eyes slowly ease. "I'm a terrible wife," she said finally. Caleb snorted. "You've been a wife for 2 days, and I've already nearly killed you. I've survived worse." He looked at her. "Besides, you jumped in, tried to put the fire out before I got there, saw you grab the towel." "It didn't help." "No, but you tried. That counts for something." They ended up eating cold biscuits and jerky for dinner. Eleanor felt like a failure, but Caleb seemed unbothered. He ate one-handed, his burned hand resting on the table, and told her about the time he'd set the barn on fire trying to smoke out a wasp nest. "How old were you?" she asked. 14. "Should have known better. My father made me rebuild the whole thing from scratch. Said if I was going to be stupid, I'd at least learn from it." "Did you?" "Never set another barn on fire. So I guess it worked." Eleanor laughed despite herself. Caleb smiled, a real smile, not the careful half version she'd seen before. Later, when they lay in bed, Eleanor listened to him breathe in the darkness. His burned hand rested on top of the blanket, the blisters ugly and painful looking. "Caleb?" "Does it hurt?" "Some. I really am sorry." "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "Eleanor?" "Yes?" "Stop apologizing. You're learning. That's all anyone can do." She rolled toward him, saw his profile in the moonlight coming through the window. "Were you always this patient?" "No. Sarah used to say I was impossible, too critical, too demanding." "You're not. Not with me. Maybe because I know what it's like to be learning." His voice was soft. "And maybe because I don't want to drive you away." Eleanor reached out, found his good hand, threaded her fingers through his. "You won't." "You keep saying that." "Because it's true." He turned his head, met her eyes. "I hope you're right." "I am." She wasn't sure if she believed it herself, but she needed him to believe it. Needed them both to believe it, because the alternative, giving up, walking away, felt impossible now. The next morning, Caleb's hand was worse. The blisters had swollen, angry, and weeping. He tried to work anyway, but Eleanor saw him wince when he gripped the fence wire. "You need to rest it," she said. "Can't. Work doesn't stop because I'm hurt." "Then let me help." He looked skeptical. "You don't know how." "So teach me." They spent the day together, Caleb directing while Eleanor did the actual labor, hauling water to the cattle troughs, mucking out stalls, spreading feed. Her back ached, her hands blistered, her dress was filthy by noon. But she learned how to approach a cow without spooking it, how to check a trough for leaks, how to distribute hay so the cattle didn't fight over it. Small, practical things that made her feel less helpless. "You're a quick study," Caleb said as they walked back to the house that evening. "I'm motivated." "To prove something?" "To myself, maybe, and to you." "You don't have to prove anything to me." "Don't I?" She stopped, faced him. "You're still waiting for me to fail, to decide this is too hard and leave. I can see it in how you watch me." He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "It's not personal." "It feels personal." "Eleanor, I'm not asking you to trust me completely. Not yet. But I am asking you to give me a chance. A real one. Not just expecting me to run at the first difficulty." Caleb was quiet. Then he nodded slowly. "You're right. I'm sorry." "Don't apologize. Just try. That's all I'm asking." "I can do that." They went inside. Eleanor heated water for washing while Caleb started dinner. One-handed, but competent. They'd fallen into a rhythm without quite realizing it. She set the table. He cooked. They moved around each other in the small space without colliding. After dinner, Eleanor cleaned and rebandaged his hand. The blisters were draining, which Caleb said was good. She wrapped clean cloth around his palm, tied it carefully. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome." He flexed his fingers, testing the bandage. "You're getting better at this, the nursing." "My mother taught me some. Before she died." Eleanor sat back. She believed women should know how to handle injuries, said you couldn't always count on a doctor being around. She was right about that. Doc Preston's good, but he's an hour away on a fast horse. Then I'll keep learning. She meant it, because out here, self-sufficiency wasn't optional. It was survival. That night they lay in bed talking. It was becoming a habit. This quiet time before sleep where they shared pieces of themselves. Small stories, careful truths. "What do you miss most?" Caleb asked. "About Philadelphia?" Eleanor thought about it. The noise, strangely enough. There was always something happening. Vendors calling, carriages on cobblestones, people everywhere. Here it's so quiet sometimes I can hear my own heartbeat. Does that bother you? I thought it would, but I'm getting used to it. She paused. What do you miss about before Sarah? Believing it could work, having hope about the future instead of just dread. The honesty in his voice made her chest ache. Do you have any hope now? He turned toward her. In the darkness, she could just make out his features. Some. More than I did a week ago. Because of me? Yeah, because of you. Eleanor's throat tightened. She wanted to say something meaningful, something that would bridge the distance still between them, but words felt inadequate. Instead, she moved closer, rested her head on his shoulder, felt him tense, then slowly relax. His arm came around her, careful of his burned hand. They fell asleep like that, closer than before, still learning each other's shapes. The days began to blur together. Each one brought new challenges, new lessons. Eleanor learned to milk the cow without getting kicked, to separate eggs without breaking the yolks, to tell when the stove was hot enough by holding her hand above it. She made mistakes. Lots of them. Let the bread dough rise too long until it collapsed. Put too much salt in the stew. Forgot to close the chicken coop and spent an hour chasing hens in the dark. But she kept trying. Caleb grew more patient. Stopped watching her like she might vanish, started including her in decisions about the ranch. Asked her opinion on things, actually listened to her answers. Trust, Eleanor learned, wasn't built in grand gestures. It was built in small moments, in showing up day after day, and choosing to stay when leaving would be easier. 2 weeks after the wedding, Mrs. Chen came to visit. She arrived in a wagon loaded with fabric samples, claiming she needed Eleanor's opinion on new stock for the store. Liar, Eleanor said, smiling. You came to check on me. Can't I do both? Mrs. Chen climbed down, looked around the ranch with assessing eyes. Place looks good. You look different. Different how? Settled. Like you belong here. Eleanor glanced toward the barn where Caleb was working. I'm trying to. And how's he treating you? Well, better than well, actually. She searched for words. He's trying too. We both are. Mrs. Chen smiled. Good. That's what marriage should be. Two people trying together. She pulled out fabric samples. Now, help me decide between these calicos, and tell me everything. They spent the afternoon on the porch, drinking coffee and talking. Eleanor found herself telling Mrs. Chen things she hadn't quite admitted to herself. How scared she still was sometimes. How lonely it got when Caleb was out working and she was alone with her thoughts. How strange it felt to be building a life with someone who was still partly a stranger. That's normal, Mrs. Chen said. Marriage doesn't make you instantly know each other. It just gives you the framework to learn. The rest is time and patience. What if it's not enough? Time and patience. Then you add work, communication, forgiveness when you mess up, and you will mess up. Both of you. She folded a piece of fabric carefully. But here's the thing. I've been watching Caleb since he brought you to town. He looks at you like you're something precious, something he's afraid to break. He looks at me like I might run away. Same thing, Eleanor. He's afraid of losing you because you matter. That's not nothing. Eleanor thought about that after Mrs. Chen left. about the way Caleb's expression softened when he saw her, the way he always made sure she ate enough, stayed warm, didn't work too hard. Small protections she'd barely noticed. Maybe she did matter to him. Maybe this fragile thing between them was stronger than she'd thought. That evening, she decided to test it. "Caleb," she said over dinner, "I want to go to town tomorrow, visit the school." He looked up. "Why?" "Because I was a teacher, and I heard from Martha that they don't have one right now. The children are just running wild. No education at all. And you want to teach them." "Maybe, if they'd have me." He was quiet. Eleanor held her breath, waiting. "It's a lot of work," he said finally, "teaching and managing here." "I know, but I think I could do both if you'd help with the ranch work." "I already help." "I mean more. Really sharing it, being partners." The word hung between them. Partners. It was what she'd asked for on their wedding night, what she'd been working toward. Caleb set down his fork, looked at her with those winter sky eyes. "You really want this?" "I do." "Why?" "Because those children deserve to learn, and because I'm good at teaching. It's the one thing I know I can do well." She leaned forward. "I'm not trying to escape the ranch, Caleb. I'm trying to bring part of myself into this life. Make it feel less like I gave up who I was and more like I'm building something new." He nodded slowly. "All right." "All right?" "Yeah, go to town tomorrow. Talk to the Reverend about the school. If they want you to teach, we'll figure out how to make it work." Relief flooded through her. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. You're not asking permission. You're telling me what you need. That's different." "Is it?" "Yeah, it means you're starting to see this as your home, not mine, ours." The distinction mattered. Eleanor felt it settle in her chest, warm and real. They cleaned up dinner together, moving in comfortable silence. When Eleanor reached for a plate at the same moment Caleb did, their hands collided. He caught her fingers, held them for a moment. "I'm glad you're here," he said quietly. "So am I." He smiled. Then, surprising them both, he leaned in and kissed her. Not the careful brush of lips from their wedding, but something deeper, real. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with something Eleanor was starting to recognize as hope. "Come to bed," he said. And Eleanor, heart racing, said yes. That night changed something between them. Not everything. They were still learning, still careful, but enough that the air felt different when they woke the next morning. Caleb's arm was around her waist, her back pressed against his chest, and for the first time since arriving in Texas, Eleanor felt like she'd found solid ground. He stirred behind her, his breath warm against her neck. "Morning? Morning?" Neither of them moved. The moment felt too fragile to break. Finally, Caleb shifted, sat up. "You still want to go to town? Talk about the school?" "Yes?" "Then we should leave soon. Get there before it's too hot." They dressed quickly, ate a simple breakfast. Caleb saddled both horses while Eleanor changed into her blue dress, the one from the wedding. It seemed appropriate somehow. If she was going to ask about teaching, she wanted to look like someone they'd trust with their children. The ride to town was quiet, but comfortable. Eleanor noticed Caleb riding closer than before, his leg occasionally brushing hers when the horses moved together. Small touches that felt significant. The schoolhouse sat at the edge of town, a narrow building with peeling paint and broken windows. Eleanor's heart sank when she saw it. "It's been empty 2 years," Caleb said, reading her expression. "Last teacher left for California. Nobody's wanted to take it on since." "Why not?" "Doesn't pay much. And the kids? They're rough. Farm children, ranch children, more interested in work than books." "Children are always interested in books if you show them the right ones." Caleb smiled slightly. "Then show them." The Reverend was in the church writing Sunday's sermon. He looked up when they entered, surprise crossing his face. "Caleb." "Eleanor. What brings you here?" "The school," Eleanor said. "I heard you're looking for a teacher." The Reverend set down his pen. "Looking isn't quite the word. More like desperately hoping. You interested?" "I am. I taught in Philadelphia for 4 years, reading, writing, arithmetic, history. I can provide references if you need them." "References?" The Reverend laughed, but it wasn't unkind. "Eleanor, If you're willing to take on those children, you're hired. When can you start? She blinked. Just like that? Just like that. We've got maybe 15 children in this town and the surrounding ranches who need education. Right now, they're getting none. You show up and teach them something, anything, and you'll be doing more than we've managed in 2 years. What about pay? Not much. Maybe $20 a month. I know it's not. I'll take it. The Reverend's shoulders sagged with relief. Thank you. Really, the parents will be grateful. Eleanor looked around the church, her mind already racing. I'll need supplies, books, slates, chalk, and the schoolhouse needs repairs. We can manage the repairs, Caleb said quietly. Both Eleanor and the Reverend turned to him. I'll get some of the ranch hands together, fix the windows, patch the roof, get it cleaned out. You don't have to, Eleanor started. I know I don't have to, but if you're doing this, we're going to do it right. He looked at the Reverend. Give us a week. We'll have it ready. The Reverend nodded, clearly moved. I'll spread the word. Let the parents know to expect school to start week after next. They left the church together. Eleanor felt light, almost giddy. She had purpose again. Something that was hers. Thank you, she said to Caleb as they mounted their horses. For what? For supporting this. I know it means more work for you. Yeah, well, he adjusted his reins. You were right. About being partners. Partners support each other. Even when it's inconvenient? Especially then. They rode through town and Eleanor noticed people watching them, some with curiosity, some with approval. Mrs. Chen waved from the door of her shop. Walt nodded from the general store. The town was starting to accept them as a unit, as real. On the way home, they stopped by the creek to water the horses. Eleanor dismounted, stretched her back. The sun was high now, the heat pressing down. Can I ask you something? She said. Caleb looked over. Sure. Last night, was that? She faltered, unsure how to phrase it. Did you mean it? Mean what? Everything. The kiss, Her cheeks heated. I need to know if it was real or if you were just trying to make me feel better. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked over to her, took her hands in his. It was real, he said. Probably the most real thing I've done in 5 years. Then why do you look scared? Because I am. Because letting you in means you can hurt me. And I've been hurt enough. Eleanor squeezed his hands. I'm scared too. Of failing, of not being enough, of waking up one day and realizing I made a terrible mistake. Have you made a mistake? No. She said it with certainty. No, I don't think I have. He pulled her closer, rested his forehead against hers. Neither have I. They stood there by the creek, horses drinking peacefully behind them, the whole prairie stretched out silent and watching. And Eleanor thought maybe this was what her parents had, this quiet certainty, this choice to keep choosing each other. The next week passed in a blur of activity. True to his word, Caleb rallied the ranch hands and several men from town. They descended on the schoolhouse like a small army, hammering and sawing and hauling away debris. Eleanor watched from the doorway as they worked, marveling at the transformation. Broken windows replaced, roof patched, floors scrubbed clean. Someone even built new desks, rough but sturdy. You're staring, Mrs. Chen said, appearing beside her with a basket of cleaning supplies. I can't believe they're doing all this. People like a project. Gives them something to talk about besides weather and cattle prices. She handed Eleanor a rag. Come on, these walls won't wash themselves. They worked together, cleaning years of dust and neglect. Other women showed up. Martha, the Reverend's wife, with her stern efficiency. A young mother named Sarah Johnson, with her baby strapped to her back. Even Walt's wife Beth, who Eleanor had barely met, came with a bucket and determination. Heard you taught in Philadelphia, Beth said as they scrubbed. I did. Fancy school? Not particularly. Just a small day school for working families. Beth nodded approvingly. Good. These children don't need fancy. They need practical. By week's end, the schoolhouse looked almost respectable. The women had sewn curtains from donated fabric. Someone had found an old bell and mounted it above the door. The Reverend contributed a shelf of books from the church. Not many, but a start. Eleanor stood in the center of the room, turning slowly, taking it all in. Her schoolhouse, her classroom. "What do you think?" Caleb asked from the doorway. She turned to him, eyes bright with tears she didn't bother hiding. "It's perfect. It's a mess, but it's yours. Ours. This whole town helped. They did. You've won them over." He walked in, looked around. They were skeptical at first, city woman coming here thinking she could handle frontier life, but you proved them wrong. "I'm not sure I've proven anything yet." "You have. You stayed. You worked. You didn't give up when it got hard." He faced her. "That matters to people here." Eleanor moved closer to him. "Does it matter to you?" "Yeah, it matters to me." She kissed him then, there in the empty schoolhouse with dust motes dancing in the afternoon light. He kissed her back, his hands finding her waist, pulling her closer. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb's eyes were dark with something Eleanor was learning to recognize. "We should get home," he said, voice rough. "Yes, we should." They barely made it through the door before they were reaching for each other again. And this time there was no hesitation, no careful distance. Just two people who'd been dancing around each other finally letting go. Later, lying tangled in sheets with the windows open to catch the evening breeze, Eleanor traced the scar on Caleb's chest. Another old injury she'd discovered. "How'd you get this one?" she asked. "Kicked by a horse when I was 12. Cracked 2 ribs. You're covered in scars." "Ranching isn't gentle work." "No, I'm learning that." She propped herself up on one elbow, looked at him. "Are you happy?" The question seemed to surprise him. "Right now?" "In general. With this life. With me." Caleb was quiet for a moment, his hand moving absently through her unbound hair. "I didn't think I could be. Happy, I mean. After Sarah, after everything, I thought maybe I'd just exist. Work until I couldn't work anymore, then die alone. That's bleak." "It's honest, or it was." He met her eyes. "But yeah, I'm happy. More than I thought possible." "Good. Because I am too. Even with the burned dinners and the hard work and the loneliness, even with all that," she kissed his shoulder. "This is real, Caleb, what we're building. You believe that now, don't you?" "I'm starting to." It wasn't quite the declaration she wanted, but it was progress, and progress was enough. School started on a Monday morning in late September. Eleanor woke before dawn, nerves jumping in her stomach. Caleb was already up, making coffee. "You ready?" he asked. "No, but I'm doing it anyway." He smiled. "That's my girl." The word settled warm in her chest. His girl. She was. They rode to town together. Caleb had work in the area, he said, but Eleanor suspected he just wanted to be nearby. For support, or maybe just because he could. Children were already gathering when she arrived. 15, just as the Reverend had said. Ages ranging from 6 to 14 in worn clothes and bare feet, eyeing her with open suspicion. Eleanor took a breath, rang the bell, and watched them file inside. The first day was chaos. The older boys tested her immediately, talking back, refusing to sit still. The younger children couldn't focus for more than a few minutes. Half of them couldn't read at all. By noon, Eleanor's head was pounding. By afternoon, she was questioning every decision that had led her to this moment. But she didn't give up. She adjusted, improvised, found what worked. The boys settled when she gave them math problems about cattle and land measurements. The young ones paid attention when she read aloud with different voices for each character. By the end of the day, they'd accomplished something. Not much, but something. "How'd it go?" Caleb asked when he picked her up. "Terrible. Wonderful. Exhausting." She sagged against him. "I have no idea if I'm doing it right." "Did they learn anything?" "Maybe." "Then you're doing it right." The days fell into a new rhythm. Eleanor taught Monday through Friday, came home exhausted, and fell into bed beside Caleb. On weekends, they worked the ranch together, or tried to. Eleanor was getting better, stronger, more capable, but there was still so much to learn. One Saturday morning, 3 weeks into the school term, Caleb woke her before dawn. "Get dressed," he said. "Warm clothes." "Why?" "Just trust me." Intrigued, Eleanor dressed quickly. Caleb led her outside to where both horses were already saddled. He handed her a canteen and a bundle wrapped in cloth. "What's this?" she asked. "Breakfast. We're riding out." "Where?" "You'll see." They rode north as the sun rose, painting the prairie gold and red. Eleanor didn't ask questions, just followed. After an hour, they reached a rise she'd never seen before. Caleb dismounted, helped her down, and led her to the edge. The view took her breath away. The land rolled out below them in waves of grass, the creek cutting silver through it, cattle scattered like dark seeds. In the distance, she could see the ranch house, small but solid. Their home. "This is my favorite spot," Caleb said quietly. "Come here when I need to think, remind myself why I do this." "It's beautiful." "Yeah." He unwrapped the bundle, biscuits, bacon, apples. "Thought you should see it, see what we're building." They sat on the edge of the rise, eating breakfast as the day brightened around them. Eleanor leaned against Caleb's shoulder, felt his arm come around her. "Tell me something," she said. "Something you've never told anyone." He considered. "I write poetry sometimes, bad poetry, but it helps me think." Eleanor straightened, looked at him in surprise. "Really? Don't look so shocked. Just because I'm a rancher doesn't mean I can't." "I'm not shocked you write poetry. I'm shocked you've never mentioned it." She poked his chest. "Can I read some?" "Absolutely not." "Why not?" "Because it's terrible. And private." "I showed you my teaching. That's private." "That's different." "How?" He was quiet. Then, "Because the poetry is about you." Eleanor's breath caught. "Oh." "Yeah." "Oh." His ears were red. "Told you it was private." "I don't care if it's terrible. I want to read it." "Eleanor." "Please?" He groaned. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" "Nope." "Fine, when we get home. But if you laugh, we're never speaking of it again." She kissed his cheek. "Deal." They stayed on the rise until mid-morning, talking and watching the land come alive. Caleb told her about his plans for the ranch, expanding the herd, planting windbreaks, maybe building a bigger barn. Eleanor shared her hopes for the school, teaching the children not just to read but to love reading, to see education as freedom rather than burden. "You think we can do it?" she asked. "Build all this?" "I think we can try. That's all anyone can do." "And if we fail, then we fail together, and we try something else." The certainty in his voice made her believe it, made her believe in them. They rode back slowly, stopping to check fence lines and water sources. Caleb showed her how to spot weaknesses in the wire, how to tell if cattle had been through an area recently by the grass patterns. "You're a good teacher," Eleanor said. "Years of practice." "No, I mean it. You're patient, clear. You don't make me feel stupid when I don't understand." "Why would I? Everyone starts somewhere." "Not everyone sees it that way." He glanced at her. "Sarah used to get frustrated when I tried to teach her ranch work, said I was condescending." "Were you?" "Maybe. I don't know. I thought I was helping, but she took it as criticism." He shook his head. "With you, it's different. You want to learn. You don't take it personally when you mess up." "Oh, I take it personally. I just don't show it." Caleb laughed. "That's the difference then. You keep trying even when it's personal." They reached the ranch as afternoon shadows lengthened. Eleanor unsaddled Rosie, rubbed her down the way Caleb had taught her. The mare nickered softly, nuzzling her shoulder. "She likes you," Caleb said. "How can you tell?" "She only does that with people she trusts." Eleanor stroked the mare's nose, feeling oddly proud. "Good. I like her too." Inside, Caleb made good on his promise. He pulled a battered notebook from a shelf, handed it to Eleanor with obvious reluctance. "Remember, you asked for this." Eleanor opened it carefully. The pages were filled with Caleb's handwriting, surprisingly neat, though the words themselves were crossed out and rewritten in places. She read the first poem, then the second, her eyes getting wider. They weren't terrible. They were raw and honest and full of longing, about storms and starlight and a woman who'd stepped off a stagecoach into his life. "Caleb," she said softly, "I know. They're bad. They're not. They're—" She looked up at him, eyes bright. "They're beautiful." He shifted uncomfortably. "You're just being nice." "I'm not. Listen." He read aloud. She came through lightning, came through rain, brought something I'd forgot. Not comfort, not softness, but the will to feel again. Eleanor's voice cracked. You wrote this about me? Who else would I write about? She set the notebook down carefully, crossed to him, wrapped her arms around his neck. I love you. The words were out before she could stop them. Caleb went very still. Eleanor, I know it's soon. I know we're still learning each other, but I need you to know I love you. I'm in love with you, and I'm not leaving, ever. For a long moment, he didn't respond. Eleanor's heart hammered. Maybe she'd pushed too far, said too much. Then Caleb's arms came around her tight and fierce. I love you too, he said against her hair. Might have loved you since you sat in that mud, soaking wet and stubborn, refusing to quit. Eleanor laughed, the sound half sob. That's a terrible moment to fall in love. Yeah, well, I'm not good at doing things the right way. Neither am I. They held each other as darkness fell outside, and Eleanor thought about storms and starlight and the strange winding path that had brought them here, to this moment, to each other. The next weeks passed in a haze of work and love and slowly building something real. Eleanor's school flourished. The children were actually learning, actually excited about books. The older boys had stopped testing her. The younger ones clung to her skirts, begging for one more story. The ranch work continued. Caleb taught Eleanor to rope, though she was terrible at it. Taught her to shoot, which she was better at. Taught her 100 small skills that made frontier life possible. And at night, they lay tangled together, sharing dreams and fears and the quiet certainty that they'd found something worth fighting for. Then, on a cold morning in early November, everything changed. Eleanor woke to Caleb already dressed, pulling on his heavy coat. Where are you going? She asked sleepily. North pasture. One of the hands said there's a bull acting strange, aggressive, need to check it out. Want me to come? No, sleep. I'll be back by breakfast. He kissed her forehead and left. Eleanor dozed off again, lulled by the warmth of the blankets. She woke to pounding on the door. Heart racing, Eleanor threw on a robe and ran to answer it. One of the young ranch hands stood there, white-faced and panting. Mrs. Ryder, you need to come. It's Caleb, the bull. He's hurt bad. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. Where? North pasture. We got him on a wagon, but you should come. She didn't remember dressing, didn't remember the ride out, just the terrible cold fear that had settled in her chest. They'd laid Caleb in the back of the wagon, his shirt soaked with blood. His face was gray, twisted with pain. When he saw her, he tried to smile. Hey, don't you dare. Her voice shook. Don't you dare hey me. Bull got me, hooked me in the side. It's not as bad as it looks. It looked terrible. The wound in his side was deep, ragged. Blood pulsed with each heartbeat. We need Doc Preston, Eleanor said. Already sent someone, one of the hands said. But he's an hour away, maybe more. An hour. Caleb could bleed out in an hour. Eleanor looked at the wound, at Caleb's face, at the fear in the ranch hand's eyes. They were all waiting for her to break, to panic, to prove she was just a city woman who couldn't handle crisis. Instead, something cold and clear settled over her, her mother's voice in her head. When there's blood, you don't freeze, you act. Get him to the house, she ordered. Carefully, and someone boil water as much as you can. I need clean cloth, needle and thread, and whiskey. Eleanor, Caleb started. Shut up, save your strength. They carried him inside, laid him on the table because it was bigger than the bed. Eleanor stripped away his shirt, exposing the full extent of the damage. The wound was deep, ugly, but the blood flow was steady, not spurting. No major vessels hit. That was good. This is going to hurt, she told Caleb. I know. She poured whiskey over the wound. He arched off the table with a strangled sound, face going white, but the bleeding slowed. Hold him, she told the ranch hands. They did, gripping Caleb's arms and legs as Eleanor worked. She cleaned the wound with shaking hands, her mother's lessons coming back. Check for debris. Make sure it's clean. Close it fast. The needle felt huge in her hands, the thread too thick, but she threaded it anyway, leaned over Caleb's torn flesh, and began to stitch. He didn't scream, just breathed hard through his teeth, sweat pouring down his face. Eleanor worked with grim focus. each stitch small and tight, the way her mother had taught her. "Talk to me," Caleb gasped. "About what?" "Anything. Your voice helps." So Eleanor talked about the school, about the children learning to read, about the little girl who'd finally mastered her letters, about plans for winter lessons, anything to keep him conscious, keep him fighting. The wound took 23 stitches. When Eleanor tied off the last one, her hands were covered in Caleb's blood and her whole body was shaking. "Done," she whispered. Caleb's eyes fluttered open. "You did it." "I don't know if I did it right." "You did it. That's enough." Doc Preston arrived an hour later to find Caleb bandaged, resting, and Eleanor sitting beside him with blood-stained hands and fierce eyes. The doctor examined the wound carefully, tested the stitches. Then he looked at Eleanor with something like respect. "Who taught you to suture?" "My mother. She was a midwife." "Well, she taught you well. These are good stitches, clean, tight. You might have saved his life." Eleanor's knees went weak. She sat down hard. Doc Preston rebandaged the wound, left instructions for keeping it clean, warned about infection. Then he left, shaking his head in what might have been admiration. The ranch hands filed out quietly. Eleanor sat beside Caleb, holding his hand. "You're not allowed to die," she said. "Wasn't planning on it." "I mean it, Caleb. You don't get to do that to me. Not now. Not ever." He squeezed her hand weakly. "I love you too." She laughed, the sound half hysterical. "That's not funny." "Little bit funny. You almost died." "But I didn't, because of you." Eleanor looked at him, this stubborn, infuriating man who'd become her whole world. "We're partners. That's what partners do. They save each other." "Yeah, they do." She leaned down, kissed him gently, tasted salt and copper and fear. "Don't ever scare me like that again." "I'll try." "Do better than try." He smiled, eyes already closing. "Yes, ma'am." Eleanor sat with him through the night, watching him breathe, checking his temperature, changing bandages when they needed it. She didn't sleep, didn't dare, just kept vigil, one hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady. At dawn, Mrs. Chen arrived with food and clean supplies. She took one look at Eleanor and shook her head. "You need rest." "I need to watch him." "I'll watch him. You sleep." "I can't." "Eleanor." Mrs. Chen's voice was firm. "You did the impossible yesterday. You saved him, but you're no good to him if you collapse from exhaustion. Sleep. I'll wake you if anything changes." Eleanor wanted to argue, but exhaustion was crushing her. She nodded, stumbled to the bedroom, and fell onto the bed still wearing her blood-stained dress. She woke to afternoon light in panic, lurched up, ran to the main room. Caleb was awake, propped up on pillows, talking quietly with Mrs. Chen. He looked pale, but alive. So alive. "Hey," he said when he saw her. "Come here." Eleanor crossed to him on shaking legs. He reached for her hand, pulled her down to sit beside him. "You slept," he said. "I didn't want to." "I know, but you needed to." He touched her face. "Thank you for yesterday, for not giving up. I told you, I'm not leaving, not for anything. Not even a charging bull? Especially not for a charging bull." Mrs. Chen stood. "I'll give you two some privacy. Eleanor, there's stew on the stove. Make sure he eats." After she left, Eleanor helped Caleb eat, fussing over him until he gently pushed the spoon away. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You nearly died." "But I didn't." He pulled her closer. "Because you were there. Because you knew what to do. Because you're the bravest person I've ever met. I was terrified, but you did it anyway. That's what brave is." Eleanor rested her head carefully on his shoulder, mindful of his injury. "We make a good team." "Yeah, we do." They sat like that for a long time, just breathing together. Outside, the ranch continued its rhythms. Inside, two people who'd gambled everything on hope held tight to what they'd found. Caleb's recovery was slow and stubborn, like the man himself. He hated being confined to bed, hated needing help with simple tasks, hated the weakness that came with healing. But Eleanor was relentless. She changed his bandages twice daily, watched for signs of infection, forced him to rest even when he argued. "I should be working," he said on the third day, trying to sit up. Eleanor pushed him back down. You should be healing. The ranch doesn't run itself. The hands are managing, and I'm helping when I can. You're teaching. I'm doing both. She sat beside him, took his hand. Caleb, you nearly died. Your body needs time. We can't afford time. Winter's coming. There's work. There's always work. But right now you need to trust me. Trust the hands. Trust that the world won't fall apart if you rest for a week. He looked at her with those winter sky eyes, frustration and fear warring in them. I don't know how to do nothing. Then learn, like I learned to make biscuits and rope cattle and survive out here. She leaned in, kissed his forehead. Let me take care of you, the way you took care of me when I arrived in that storm. Something in his expression softened. That was different. How? You were lost. I was just doing what needed doing. And now I'm doing what needs doing, which is keeping you alive. She stood, smoothed his blanket. Now rest, or I'll tie you to this bed. Despite himself, Caleb smiled. You're terrifying when you're bossy. Good, remember that. She left him to sleep and went outside to check on the ranch. The hands had been true to their word. Cattle fed, fences mended, work continuing. But she could see the strain. They were managing without Caleb, but barely. Tom Harrison, the oldest hand, approached her as she walked toward the barn. Mrs. Ryder, how's he doing? Healing, slowly. Eleanor looked around the yard. How are things here? Manageable. But we could use his eye on a few things. Got a cow that's limping. Not sure if it's serious or if she just stepped wrong. Show me. Tom led her to the pasture where a brown cow stood, apart from the herd, favoring her left rear leg. Eleanor approached slowly, the way Caleb had taught her, speaking low and calm. The cow let her get close enough to examine the leg. Eleanor ran her hands carefully down the limb, feeling for heat or swelling. Found both around the hoof. Looks like an abscess, she said. See the swelling here? And she's hot to the touch. You sure? No. But Caleb showed me something similar a few weeks ago. We need to soak it, lance it if necessary. Keep it clean. Tom looked skeptical. Ma'am, no disrespect, but maybe we should wait for Caleb. Caleb can't walk. This cow needs help now. Eleanor met his eyes. I'm not saying I know everything, but I know enough. And if I'm wrong, we'll deal with it. Slowly, Tom nodded. All right, what do you need? They worked together, Tom and Eleanor, and another young hand named Pete. Got the cow isolated, soaked her hoof in warm salt water, lanced the abscess when it was soft enough. The cow kicked and bellowed, but they managed. By evening, she was walking better, the swelling already going down. Eleanor returned to the house exhausted and covered in mud. Caleb was awake, trying to read by lamplight. Productive day? He asked. Treated an abscess. Tom wasn't sure I could do it. Could you? Apparently, yes. She washed her hands in the basin. You would have done it better. Maybe. But you did it. That's what matters. Eleanor changed into clean clothes, brought Caleb soup for dinner. As they ate, she told him about the cow, about Tom's initial skepticism, about how she'd channeled everything Caleb had taught her. They're starting to trust you, he said. The hands, the town, seeing you as more than just my wife. Is that what I was? Just your wife? You know what I mean. You've made your own place here. Your school, your work with the ranch. You're not Eleanor who married Caleb anymore. You're just Eleanor, standing on your own. The observation settled warm in her chest. Because he was right. Somewhere along the way, she'd stopped being the desperate woman from Philadelphia and become someone new. Someone stronger. I like who I'm becoming, she said quietly. So do I. By the end of the week, Caleb was well enough to walk short distances. Doc Preston came to check the wound, pronounced it healing cleanly, and told Eleanor she had a future in medicine if she ever tired of teaching. I'll stick with books, she said. Less blood. Shame. You're good at it. After the doctor left, Caleb insisted on walking outside. Eleanor supported him, moving slowly across the yard. He stopped at the fence, looked out over his land. Missed this view, he said. You were only inside a week. Longest week of my life. He turned to her. Thank you. For everything. For saving me, taking care of the ranch, not letting me give up. You wouldn't have given up. I don't know. When that bull hit me, when I was lying there bleeding, I thought maybe this was it. Maybe I'd pushed my luck too far. His voice went quiet. But then I thought about you, about everything we're building, and I couldn't let go. Eleanor's throat tightened. Good, because I wasn't letting you go either. They stood together in the fading light, Caleb's arm around her shoulders, both of them looking at the land that had become theirs. The cattle moved slowly through the pasture. Smoke rose from the bunkhouse where the hands were making dinner. Everything continued, steady and sure. We should get married again, Caleb said suddenly. Eleanor blinked. We are married. I know. But the first time, it was fast, scared. Two strangers making promises they weren't sure they could keep. He turned to face her fully. I want to do it again. Choose you again. But this time, knowing exactly who you are and loving you anyway. Anyway? She raised an eyebrow. That's romantic. You know what I mean, loving you because of who you are, all of it. The stubbornness and the fear and the strength and the way you refuse to quit even when you should. Eleanor's eyes burned. When? Spring. When the wildflowers bloom. We'll do it right this time. Invite everyone, have a real celebration. Show the whole town that we made it. We haven't made it yet. We're still making it. Then we'll show them we're trying, and that's worth celebrating. Eleanor kissed him, tasting salt and promise. All right, spring, but I'm wearing the blue dress again. I'd expect nothing less. Winter came hard that year. Snow fell early and stayed late, blanketing the prairie in white silence. The cattle huddled against the cold. The creek froze solid. Eleanor's school closed for weeks at a time when the roads became impassable. But inside the ranch house, warmth persisted. Caleb taught Eleanor to play chess by lamplight. She read to him from the books they both loved. They planned for spring, what they'd plant, where they'd expand, how they'd grow the herd. I want to try something, Eleanor said one night as they lay in bed, wind howling outside. What's that? Chickens. A proper coop, maybe 30 birds. We could sell eggs in town, have fresh ones for ourselves. You know how to raise chickens? No, but I can learn. She propped herself up on one elbow. And I was thinking, the school. I want to expand it, teach older students too, maybe even adults who never learned to read. That's ambitious. So is running a ranch in Texas, but we're doing it. Caleb smiled. We are, aren't we? We're doing a lot of impossible things. What's a few more? He pulled her close. Nothing. With you, nothing's impossible. It was a pretty sentiment, but they both knew better. Life out here was all about limits. What the land could support, what the body could endure, what a single season could destroy. But they were learning to work within those limits, to push where they could and bend where they had to. The first real test came in February. A blizzard hit without warning, burying the ranch in 3 feet of snow. The cattle were scattered, some trapped in drifts. The hands couldn't reach the bunkhouse. Everything stopped. Caleb and Eleanor worked for 36 hours straight, digging out animals, hauling feed, breaking ice on the troughs. Eleanor's fingers went numb. Her back screamed, but she kept moving because Caleb was moving, because stopping meant losing cattle they couldn't afford to lose. When the storm finally broke, they'd lost 4 head. Not terrible, but not good either. They stood in the barn, surrounded by exhausted animals and melting snow, and Caleb's face was grim. We can't afford many more storms like that, he said. Then we'll prepare better, build more shelter, stockpile more feed. With what money? We'll find it, sell eggs, take extra students, cut costs somewhere. Eleanor grabbed his hand. We'll figure it out, like we figure out everything else. He looked at her and something in his expression shifted. You really believe that we can make this work? Don't you? I used to doubt it. Every day I doubted it. He squeezed her hand. But not anymore. Not when I see you fight like this. Not when I see what we've built. They'd built more than either of them realized. A marriage, yes, but also a partnership that went deeper than vows. They'd built trust through crisis and love through hard work. They'd built a life that neither of them could have managed alone. Spring came late but fierce. Wildflowers exploded across the prairie, bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush and black-eyed Susans turning the land into a riot of color. The creek ran high with snowmelt. Calves were born healthy and strong. And Eleanor's chickens, 30 Rhode Island Reds, settled into their new coop and started laying. On the first warm Saturday in April, they got married again. The whole town came. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Eleanor wore her blue dress, freshly cleaned by Mrs. Chen. Caleb wore a new shirt, his wedding gift to himself. They stood in the meadow behind the church, surrounded by wildflowers and friends, and spoke new vows. Not the traditional words this time, their own. "I choose you," Eleanor said, voice steady and clear. "Not because I have to. Not because there's nowhere else to go. But because you're the best decision I ever made. Because you taught me what it means to be strong. Because I love you, all of you, and I want to keep building this life together." Caleb's voice was rough with emotion. "I choose you too. Every day I choose you. You came into my life like a storm, and you haven't stopped shaking things up since. You made me believe again. In love, in hope, in the future. I don't know what I did to deserve you, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life being grateful." They kissed to cheers and applause. Mrs. Chen dabbed at her eyes. Doc Preston raised his flask. The Reverend smiled like he'd known all along they'd make it. The celebration lasted into the evening. Someone brought a fiddle. Someone else brought whiskey. They danced in the meadow under the stars. Eleanor's skirts swirling, Caleb laughing, really laughing, for the first time since she'd known him. "Happy?" he asked, spinning her. "Deliriously. Good. Because I am too." Later, after everyone had gone home and they were alone in the house that had become truly theirs, Caleb pulled something from his pocket. "I have something for you." It was a ring, simple gold band, slightly worn. "It was my mother's," he said. "Only thing I have of hers. I want you to have it." Eleanor's hands shook as he slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "Caleb, you're family now, really family. Not just by law, but by choice. By everything we've been through." Kissed her hand. "I should have given it to you before, but I was scared. Scared you'd leave and take it with you, and I'd have nothing left of either of you. I'm not leaving." "I know. I finally know." They made love that night with a tenderness that felt new. Not the desperate need of before, but something gentler, more certain. The kind of intimacy that came from truly knowing someone and choosing them anyway. Afterward, lying tangled together, Eleanor traced patterns on Caleb's chest. "Tell me something," she said. "Something you've never told me." "I want children," he said quietly. "Someday. With you. I want to see you teaching them to read, watch them learn the ranch, build something that lasts beyond us." Eleanor's heart squeezed. "I want that too." "Yeah? Yeah. Not right now, we've got too much still to figure out. But someday, when we're ready." "When we're ready," he agreed. Summer brought new challenges. A drought that lasted 6 weeks. A snake bite that nearly killed one of the horses. Eleanor's school roof leaked during a storm, ruining half her books. But they handled it. Together. Always together. Eleanor's student roster grew to 23. Parents were noticing their children could suddenly read, could do math, could write their own names. They started asking Eleanor for adult lessons. Men who'd never learned. Women who wanted more than just survival. She started evening classes twice a week. Caleb came sometimes, sat in the back and listened to his wife teach grown men to sound out words. The pride in his eyes made her stand taller. The chicken operation exceeded expectations. Eleanor was selling 4 dozen eggs a week in town. The money wasn't much, but it was hers. She used it to buy more books for the school, to save toward the bigger barn Caleb wanted. By autumn, the ranch was in better shape than it had been in years. The herd had grown to 55 head. The fences were solid. The winter feed was stockpiled. They'd made it through a full year, together. One evening in late October, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. The air was cooling, carrying the smell of grass and distant rain. Eleanor leaned against Caleb's shoulder. "Do you ever think about how we started?" she asked. "All the time." "Do you regret any of it?" He was quiet for a moment. "I regret the fear, the doubt, the way I kept expecting you to leave. I wasted time protecting myself instead of trusting you. I was scared too, that I'd made a terrible mistake, that I'd never measure up. And now?" Eleanor thought about it, really thought. "Now I know there's no measuring up. There's just showing up, doing the work, choosing each other when it would be easier not to. That's the secret, isn't it? To any of this. Marriage, ranching, life out here, just showing up. And not giving up when it gets hard. Which it always does. Always, she agreed. But that's okay, because hard doesn't mean impossible. Caleb kissed the top of her head. When did you get so wise? I learned from a stubborn rancher who refused to let a storm beat him. And I learned from a stubborn teacher who refused to let a frontier beat her. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light fade. In the distance, cattle lowed. Chickens settled in their coop. The land breathed around them, steady and eternal. Caleb, Eleanor said after a while. Yeah? I'm pregnant. His whole body went still. Then he turned to look at her, eyes wide with shock and joy and terror. Are you sure? Pretty sure. I've missed 2 months, and I've been sick every morning. She took his hand, placed it on her still flat stomach. We're going to have a baby. For a long moment, Caleb didn't speak, just stared at her with an expression Eleanor couldn't quite read. Then his face crumpled, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. We're going to have a baby, he repeated, voice thick. Are you happy? I'm terrified, and happy, and... He pulled back, cupped her face. I love you so much, and I'm going to love this baby. We're going to give them everything we didn't have. What didn't we have? Certainty, security, parents who chose to be together instead of settling. He kissed her. Our kids going to know they were wanted, planned for, that we built this life on purpose. Eleanor's eyes burned with tears. We did, didn't we? Build it on purpose. Every hard day, every choice, every time we could have quit and didn't. He rested his forehead against hers. We built something real. They sat on the porch long into the night, talking about the future, names they liked, how they'd expand the house. Whether Eleanor could keep teaching, she insisted she could, at least for a while. Caleb worried about her health, about the work, about everything. But beneath the worry was joy, pure, uncomplicated joy. The pregnancy was hard. Eleanor was sick constantly the first 4 months, exhausted beyond reason. But she kept teaching, kept working, kept showing up because that's what they did. They showed up. Mrs. Chen became her constant companion, bringing remedies and advice in clean rags. The town rallied around them. Women Eleanor barely knew brought food, offered help, shared their own stories of frontier motherhood. You're one of us now, Martha said, sitting with Eleanor during a particularly bad morning. Really, one of us. This baby, it's frontier born. That means something. It did mean something. It meant roots. It meant future. It meant they'd done more than survive. They'd planted themselves and grown. Winter came again, but they were ready this time. Shelter built. Feed stocked. A nursery slowly taking shape in the corner of the bedroom. Caleb carved a cradle from oak, working by lamplight, each curve deliberate and careful. Eleanor watched him work, one hand on her growing belly. You're good at that. Had practice. Made one for my sister's first boy. Will you teach our child to work wood? If they want to learn, but I'm not going to force anything. He looked up at her. Whatever they want to be, rancher, teacher, something else entirely, it's their choice. Even if they want to leave, go to the city? The question cost him. She could see it, but he nodded. Even then, we chose each other. They get to choose too. It was that generosity of spirit that made Eleanor love him more each day. The way he'd learned to hold loosely, to trust, to believe that love didn't mean possession. Spring came early. The wildflowers bloomed even more brilliant than the year before, and on a warm morning in late April, Eleanor's water broke while she was feeding chickens. Caleb found her gripping the fence, breathing hard. It's time, she said. His face went white. Now? Babies don't wait for convenient timing. They got her inside. Sent for Dr. Preston and Mrs. Chen. Eleanor labored for 14 hours, Caleb holding her hand the whole time, talking her through it the way she'd talked him through the bull attack. You can do this. You're the strongest person I know. Just breathe. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. The baby came as the sun set, arriving into the world with a fierce cry that made both parents laugh through their tears. A daughter. Tiny and perfect, and absolutely theirs. What do we name her? Caleb asked, cradling the baby with terrified gentleness. Eleanor looked at her husband holding their child, at the life they'd built from nothing but hope and stubbornness. Hope, she said. We name her Hope. Because that's what she was. What they'd found in each other, what they'd built this whole impossible life on. Hope Ryder, Caleb said softly, and the baby's eyes opened, dark and alert. Welcome home. The years that followed weren't easy. Nothing about frontier life was easy. There were droughts and floods and lean years when they wondered if they'd make it. There were fights and fears and moments of doubt. But there was also love, deep and abiding and earned through hard work. There were more children, 2 sons who looked like their father and had their mother's stubborn streak. There was a school that grew until they had to build a second room. There was a ranch that became known for quality cattle and honest dealing. And there were 2 people who'd answered an advertisement out of desperation and found something neither of them expected. Not just survival, not just companionship, but partnership in its truest sense. 2 equals building something that would last. Eleanor never went back to Philadelphia, didn't even think about it, because home wasn't a place anymore. It was a person. It was a family. It was this life they'd chosen and kept choosing every single day. On their 10th anniversary, they stood in the same meadow where they'd renewed their vows. The house behind them had been expanded twice. The barn Caleb had dreamed of finally stood solid and strong. Eleanor's school had graduated 3 students who'd gone on to college in Austin. Do you remember that first night? Eleanor asked. In the storm. Every detail. You looked half drowned and completely terrified. I was. I thought I'd made the worst mistake of my life. And now? She looked at him, older now, more silver in his hair, but still the same man who'd come for her when she needed him. Now I know it was the best decision I ever made. Answering your letter, getting on that stagecoach, refusing to give up even when everything was hard. I'm glad you didn't give up. I'm glad you gave me a reason to stay. Their children played in the wildflowers, Hope chasing her brothers, their laughter carrying on the wind. The land stretched around them, no longer quite so wild but still demanding, still testing, still requiring everything they had to give. But they had it to give. Together, they had everything they needed, because that was the lesson they'd learned in Mud and Blood and Stubborn Hope. That love wasn't about finding someone perfect. It was about finding someone worth fighting for, worth showing up for, worth choosing every single day even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. Come on, Caleb said, taking her hand. Kids are getting too far ahead. They walked together through the flowers, 2 people who'd started as strangers and become something unbreakable. Not because it was easy, not because it was meant to be, but because they decided it would be and then did the work to make it true. Behind them, the ranch house stood solid against the sky. Ahead, their children's laughter rang like bells. And between was everything they'd built, every hard choice, every small victory, every moment they'd chosen each other over fear. It wasn't a fairy tale. There was no magic, no destiny, no force beyond their own determination. Just 2 flawed people who'd looked at an impossible situation and decided to make it possible anyway. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The sun sank lower, painting the prairie gold. Eleanor leaned into Caleb's side as they walked, felt his arm come around her. Solid, sure, real. I love you, she said. I love you too. Simple words. But they meant something different now than they had 10 years ago. Now they meant, I've seen you at your worst and chosen you anyway. I've built a life with you brick by brick. I'll keep choosing you tomorrow and every day after. Now they meant we made it. Against the odds, against the doubt, against everything that tried to break us, we made it. And they'd keep making it, for as long as they both had breath. That was the promise. Not spoken in any ceremony, but lived in every day, every choice. Every moment they showed up and did the work. The children called to them. Eleanor and Caleb picked up their pace, chasing after the future they'd built. Together. Always together. The prairie wind carried their laughter across the land that had tested them and made them stronger. And somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled, a promise of rain, of growth, of everything still to come. They were ready for it. Whatever came next, they'd face it the way they'd faced everything else. Together. And that made all the difference.